All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Lisa Partida with Home Again LA, and today we have Tom Fuentes with Bank of Hope. And today's topic is building your financial future. And it's been a long time coming because I know we've had to reschedule this one a couple of times. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so tonight we're talking about building your financial future. This workshop is four sections. We'll do our best to get to the first three. The fourth one is, well, the last two are very specific. It's cars as assets and your education as an asset. But we're going to spend the concentration and bulk on the first two topics, which is talking about assets and how that helps build wealth and build your financial future. So let's get into section one, which is assets and asset building. Um, in this section, we're going to explain what assets are, why they're beneficial, um, and how they can help build a financial future. And then we're going to talk about developing a plan to build assets. And by the way, let me qualify something real quick before we get into it, especially now. This is a topic that is probably even harder to talk about these days because it's so hard to do in general. Um, One of the things that is kind of a hot topic in the news right now is how overvalued something like the stock market is. Because we're going to talk a little bit about stocks as assets and those kind of things. There really is, at this point of time, in this point of history, a barrier to entry, really, because everything is so dang expensive, just like houses. So I just want to qualify before we even talk about this that this is easier said than done. How about that? But I think it's important as a part of our financial literacy workshops that we kind of talk about the key terms and get to know these things. Um, but anyway, I just kind of wanted to qualify that by acknowledging it's tough right now, and all of our situations are different from each other. Our paths towards our goals are going to be different, but at least take this as kind of like a general understanding of what we're trying to take away with when we're talking about building a financial future, whatever that really looks like. So we're going to discuss specifically and define what assets are, how assets can be beneficial, and then how assets can help build longevity towards your wealth goals, and how you can develop a plan to build that out. So, the key takeaway assets can lead to wealth and eventually to financial security. It's first important, though, that we define some key terms. So, what specifically is an asset? What are we talking about? And by the way, you can follow along in the participant guide. We're going to be referencing the participant guide throughout the workshop. There are some sections in there that you can check out after the workshop. It's kind of like a homework thing, but you'll see as we go. So, an asset is something that you own that has a store of value. So, for something to be an asset, you have to own it, you have to be able to control it, and you have to be able to make decisions about it. For assets that are not money, you must be able to exchange them for money. As we talk about different types of assets, if you can think of any, if you have a pen and paper, feel free, write those things down. You might be thinking things like my car, or in my case, when we do these workshops, I talk about sometimes how I collect sports cards. So you might, or I might write down my baseball cards. Um, it's important to remember some assets you can see and touch. These are characterized as physical assets, but that's only one type of asset, really. Assets can be financial assets. Some examples of financial assets would be the cash that you have, the money in your checking account or your savings account, or if you own stocks in the stock market or bonds, for example. Some assets are intangible and called productive assets. They're not physical, they're not financial, but they're still important. And it's important that we kind of put it in its own classification. Productive assets help you produce more assets, often earning, more money. What's an example of this? How about investing in your education or like a trade, and training to build your skills that might result into you getting a higher paying job, for example. With additional earnings, with a higher paying job, there's more money that you have at your disposal to put in a savings account or a money market account or so on and so forth, things like that. Um, Tools that you use to earn money, such as equipment for that new business idea that you have. Maybe you're a small business owner, maybe you want to get into entrepreneurship. Maybe that's the maybe a productive asset is the equipment that you need to start the hair salon. Maybe a productive asset is what you need to maybe you already own a small business and you want to reinvest and get better lawn care equipment because you have a landscaping company. So it's important to kind of put that in its own characterization and thinking about these things as being productive assets because I think it's important that we identify that the skills that we have at our disposal, our talents, the things that we're able to provide, can be productive assets and lend to more money making opportunities. Another example of that is how many of you are bilingual? That could open you up to a whole bunch of additional job opportunities, or even potentially in your current job making more money because you have the ability to help more customers than just English speaking customers or Spanish speaking customers or Chinese speaking customers or so on and so forth. So it's kind of important that we characterize these things, right? So remember physical assets, financial assets, and those being productive. Um, One of the other kind of things that we might throw into the productive class would be something like your credit reports and scores, which we talk about in these financial literacy workshops. You may want to throw that in the productive asset category because technically, I guess your credit report and your score can help you acquire further assets and opportunities. Like that might require financing. So maybe we can think of your credit score as a productive asset because if you have a good one, it may open up the possibility for you to own your own house one day. So maybe we would throw that into the productive class, I would say. An asset's value is determined based on the type of assets. So physical assets are valued based on their resale value. Um, what you can sell them for, such as like the appraisal value of the house that you own, or maybe the resale value of the car that you own, or even like if you were going to do a garage sale, it would be the value of items that you have in your household that you're willing to sell at the garage sale. Financial assets actually have like a store value, such as the balance in your savings account or the amount of cash that you have in your wallet or purse, for example. Productive assets offer benefits that are generally not reflected in dollars, kind of like how we talked about how that credit report or credit score can lend to the possibility of you buying a house, for example. On page 5 of the participant guide, and we have a try it section. You can check this out after the workshop. But what we have here, and I don't think we have the whole list, but at least this is the start of it, and identifying what you have in the item category and whether or not you would classify this as an asset. Yes, no, it depends. Um, and It can help you kind of categorize things that might not be. Let me give you an example of this. What do you think we would characterize a computer as? I mean, I think I would categorize it as an asset because, well, a computer has a store of value because you could resell it at any point. And I would say a computer has a store of value in the productive asset category because you could use your computer for work. You could use your computer to go to school. You could use your computer to do further job training to get a higher paying job, for example. A credit card is a credit card an asset? Uh, Probably not. I would probably put it in the depends category. The card itself isn't an asset, it's a piece of plastic. It could potentially be a productive asset because it could be a vehicle for allow you to get a better credit score because you're charging items, you're paying the balance off every month, and you could think of it maybe as a productive asset, but I wouldn't put it in any other category. What about a college degree or a nursing degree in this example? Is that an asset? Um, I would characterize it as a productive asset because that degree would allow you the possibility of earning more money if you were able to land a nursing job out of college, for example. So check this out after the workshop. See what you think in the items that are listed of if you think they're an asset, if you don't think they are at all, or maybe it would depend. And then you can make notes on anything further that you might think on that. And then on page 6 of the apply at my assets. So uh, this is the time for you to think about the assets that you or your family have and then answer the questions that we have. And remember, we already established that we have our 3 buckets. So on here, we see physical. So what physical assets do I or my family have? And then you see we have financial. What financial assets do I or my family have? And then lastly, what you don't see here would be that productive asset category. I think it would be beneficial to fill out the charts here to see what you have because one of the things I think I kind of always learn after doing these workshops is that you might forget about some things, right? You might, especially when you're thinking about a physical asset, now that we've kind of defined the category broadly, you might write something down that you completely forgot about. And here's the benefit of that. What if you wrote something down you forgot you had, it had value, you don't use the thing anymore? What if you could sell it and actually get money to use it for something else? Or better yet, if you don't need the money to translate that into some other or to put that money to somewhere else, maybe it's items that you're putting down in the physical category that you're willing to donate that you can be charitable with. Anyway, so check that out on page 6. I think it'd be super helpful in identifying things, and it might shake some things loose in your head that, oh, I forgot about that. Or maybe even in the financial category, like I forgot that I opened up that savings account at Bank of America years ago, and I got to check the balance of that, for example. So now that we've kind of defined our terms, right? What are the benefits? Like, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to consider this at all? So, asset building refers to strategies that increase the financial, the physical, and the productive assets that you own. The strategies may increase the value of assets that you already have, or they can help you acquire new assets in the future. Being financially secure means you can take care of yourself and your family even if the unexpected happens. So, financial security requires a combination of 2 important things. It requires both income and assets. Job losses, an accident or illness, the breakdown of your car, or needing to take an extended time off of work are examples of potentially unexpected events that may require money. Assets provide a financial cushion to help you manage those unexpected events. You can think of your assets as the foundation for your financial future, for example. Assets are essential to achieving long term financial stability and then growing long term wealth. So, owning assets. Owning assets creates a buffer, so to speak, to help you and your family handle emergencies and hardships, a reduction in hours at work, a job loss, or just a few examples of how your income can suddenly go down. A major illness, a broken furnace, air conditioner can result in unexpected expenses that you have to put your money into. Assets can help you make it through these periods of financial need. Um, Owning assets helps you reach your goals. It's easier to further your education, buy a house, have income in retirement, or start a business when you have assets at your disposal. Owning assets increases your options. Assets provide you with more options or more choices for education, for healthcare, for where you want to live, for the size of television that you may want, or a whole bunch of other different things in life. Owning assets helps you earn more income and could help you succeed in the job market. Owning a physical asset like a car can increase your income and job prospects because now you can apply for jobs in a further geographic distribution that you might otherwise wouldn't have thought about because you only had the ability to search for jobs in your local community, for example. Um, Productive assets like education and skills can help you earn more income. We've kind of already talked about that. Owning assets can inspire you to look to the future to make long-term plans. Having assets and a plan to build more assets can encourage you to meet your goals. Thinking about the future can motivate you to plan for it. Owning assets reduces stress for you and your family. Households with at least $2,000 in assets that can easily be converted to cash are less likely to forego doctor's visits or making utility payments compared to those with fewer or more aspects. And that comes from a government report from a few years ago. Families who have assets feel less stress over financial issues, knowing that they have assets or money that they can fall back on, which can provide that peace of mind that we need because money is probably the most stressful thing in our lives. Many people pass their assets on to other family members, spreading that peace of mind. So uh, if we have the ability to do this, we quite possibly could pass things down to you know our kids, their kids, and we could have the ability to have them start their financial futures by passing these assets down to them. Um, so we've defined our terms, we've talked about the why. What about the how? Page 8 of the participant guide, developing my plan to build more assets. You can start to develop your plan by answering the questions that we have in the apply it section. So, what additional assets, financial, physical, and productive, would help me meet the goals I have for my future? Um, Essentially, what we have in this activity, the activity can help you start to develop that kind of plan. And we ask ourselves, what additional assets would help me meet my goals? What resources do I need to get those assets? What specific steps could I take to get those resources? What are some obstacles that may get in the way as I build assets? And how will I manage these obstacles? And remember at the start of the workshop, I talked about how each one of our paths is going to be different from each other because we're different people and we're going to have different goals from each other. So the strategy that you would develop within this section is going to be different and specific to you. It's important to be practical in this. It's important to be time bound. You want these things to be realistic and reachable. So let's give an example. So if part of your plan was to say buy a house, think about the assets that would help you get the house, right? We kind of already talked about it earlier. And when we thought about productive assets, one asset that would help us attain that house would maintaining um, good credit habits because that could lend us to having a good credit score, which would help us find the loan at a good interest rate to buy that house. Another asset that would be helpful in buying the house is the ability to have a savings account that we're using to build up enough savings for that down payment. So that could be an example of attaining a physical assets. What about another idea or an example? What about starting a small business? We kind of already talked about this. Um, Establishing a savings account for the purposes of building up enough money so that you can buy the equipment that you would need to open up that um, food truck or that food stand that you're able to sell whatever um, cuisine that you're an expert at, things like that. Um, what about more for personal financial savings, for example? Again, easier said than done. We're talking about assets. I mentioned a house. At the moment in time right now, a house is unattainable for, I would say, most of us because they're so dang expensive. Traditionally, for a traditional mortgage, they want 20% down. There's other options, thank God, but the less you put down, the more your monthly payment. So the reason I preface what I'm going to say next is you may think about assets as being these really lofty, kind of higher priced things. But what about just the idea of starting a savings account, starting at the basics? What about at the moment, maybe I realize I don't have a savings account right now. What about opening one for 10 bucks? And then your next goal after that could get that savings account to 100 bucks. And then after that, you get that savings account to 1,000 bucks. And then you just build on top of that. With the idea being that we have to start somewhere. It doesn't matter if someone is worth $10,000, they had to start somewhere to get that $10,000. It doesn't matter if someone's worth $200,000, they had to start somewhere to get to that $200,000. Making the start is sometimes the hardest thing. And by the way, in the next section, we're going to talk about that idea of worth in the form of net worth and what that looks like. Um, but the reason I'm saying this is that we have to start somewhere. And even with $100 or even with $10, that's great. What about establishing an emergency fund? We scratched the surface of the idea that owning assets could lead to less financial stress and burden on us and our families. Well, if you have enough money set aside in an emergency fund, some financial experts say it's 3 months worth of expenses. Some say it's 6 months worth of expenses. Some think that an emergency fund would be 12 months of your current salary. Whatever advice we're taking from whatever expert we're following, or maybe we blend them and hybridize it together, it's important to start somewhere. What about an emergency fund of $1,000 and then build from there? And why do we want to do that? So that we're less reliant when the unexpected comes, and we can leave that credit card in our wallets. We can leave that credit card in our purse and paid in cash, for example, because we have that asset. Anyhow, developing my plan. We don't have the full thing here, but let me just give you an idea of what you can expect after the workshop when you look at the participant guide. What additional assets, financial, physical, or productive, would help me get to those goals? What resources do I need to get those assets? What specific steps could I take? What are some obstacles that can get in my way of building the assets? And how will I manage those obstacles? At closing, and what I think might be helpful uh, for this section for you to fill it out, and it's something I came across a while ago in my own financial literacy. I try my best to be current with financial topics and whatever is going on in the financial world. I use YouTube for that purpose. I'm sure I've mentioned it in past workshops that we've done, but a really good resource in developing a plan to build assets is specifically from the YouTube channel, The Money Guys. They have something that's called the Financial Order of Operations. I think I have a copy of it that I've kind of tweaked for the purposes of the bank's financial literacy that we do for the community. If I come across it, I'll make sure to share it with Lisa so that we have it. So if anyone needs it, I think it's super helpful that we have that. It's not anything that I've had for a while. I actually just kind of put this together within the last like few months, but I'll make sure to share it. And I think that it could be a useful tool as a companion to page 8 in the participant guide for this topic. So, in closing, assets can lead to wealth and financial security. Um, let's go to section 2, and we're going to talk about how assets can create that financial foundation that we talked about. We're going to define net worth and explain how it relates to financial security and the ability to meet financial goals, how you actually calculate that net worth, and then identifying strategies for changing it. All right, so let's discuss the relationship among assets, liabilities, equity, and net worth, with our key takeaway being net worth is a good measure of your financial stability. Calculate your net worth by subtracting your liabilities. Liabilities are the money that you owe to others, and you would subtract that from your assets to get what your net worth is. So let's talk about assets, liabilities, and equity. So to understand how assets create wealth, you need to understand how assets are related to liability and equity. An asset is something that you own that has value. To get assets, you sometimes need to borrow money. For example, to buy a house, to go to college, to buy a car, you're more than likely going to have to take a loan out. A liability is something that you owe others, usually in the form of money. Once you borrow money, you have a liability until you pay it back in full. So many assets, especially financial assets, do not create a liability. You don't have to borrow money, for example, to build a savings account, set aside money for an emergency fund, um, contribute to a retirement fund, whether that be your IRA, your Roth IRA, or your 401k, for example. Um, Save for an educational fund, for example, maybe a 529 plan or something like that. Um, Assets and liabilities are also related to equity. So equity is the value of an asset minus the liability related to that asset. It's the part of the asset that you own outright. So on page 11 of the participant guide, we have a try it section in calculating liability and equity. So in this scenario, we're talking about Ezra's car purchase. Ezra needs a car to get to work and to school. He finds a used car at a dealership that's worth $5,000. He's been saving $25 a week for the past 6 months. He now has $600 to use as a down payment. So um, ultimately, the car's value would be $5,000. Ezra decides to take out a loan to buy the car. So how much money does he need to borrow? So remember, he saved 25 a week for 6 months. He has 600 for his down payment. So the answer would be we're going to take the value of the car of 5,000 minus 600, which means that Ezra needs to borrow $4,400. So what is Ezra's liability for the car? Remember, a liability is what you owe. So the amount of money that he's borrowing after the down payment of 4,400 is the liability that Ezra is incurring. So what's Ezra's equity in the car when he drives it off the lot? So equity equals the value of the asset minus the liability related to that asset. So the answer is simply $600. It's the $600 that Ezra put down on the car. But we're talking about cars, and unfortunately, cars depreciate in value. So the value of Ezra's cars likely went down the moment he drove it off the lot. So his equity probably isn't 600, so it's just not a clean takeaway that way. But we kind of use the example to show how to calculate equity simply, and not really comment on the value of the car, because car depreciation is rapid and it happens right when you drive it off. Seriously, right when you drive it off the lot. But at least this is kind of like an example of kind of understanding the math of it, I suppose. All right, so what about net worth specifically? So net worth is a measure of someone's financial wealth. I would consider it like your scorecard. Um, Net worth is your assets minus your liabilities. It's what you have left over after you pay all of your liabilities. So another way to think about your net worth is the equity from all of your assets added together. Your net worth can be a positive number, it could be zero, it could be negative. A positive net worth means the value of your assets covers all of your liabilities, and there are still some left over. This means that you have a cushion for financial emergencies. It's good. It's really good to have a positive net worth. Zero net worth means that your assets equal your liabilities. You don't have a financial cushion. And then a negative net worth means that your liabilities are greater than your assets. You don't have a financial cushion at all. Um, so like, do you think you can determine how do I want to phrase this? Do you think that you can determine if someone is economically secure just by their income? And I think that is such an interesting question to pose because um, I don't know about you, and maybe it took a while for me. Maybe it's just as I'm getting older. And maybe social media and the internet is amplifying this and enhancing it. Just because you drive a fancy car doesn't mean you have money. So remember at the start in section one, we talked about two important factors on assets. What did we say? It requires two things. It requires okay, think about the net worth and the two factors. It requires you to have income, but also for you to have assets. One can't happen without the other. So what do I mean by that? Like you can see someone driving down the street in a Bentley or a Maserati or whatever, insert fancy car name. I'm not really into cars, so that's the extent of my knowledge probably. But just because we see someone driving a $365,000 car doesn't mean they're wealthy. Straight up, it doesn't mean that they're wealthy. It could, however, mean that they have a high income, but it doesn't mean that they're setting aside a portion of their income to purchase assets, to invest in a 401(k) retirement, to buy stocks and bonds in a mutual fund, to so on and so forth. You might go over to someone's house in some nice neighborhood that's 2 stories and 5,000 square feet and 6 beds and 4 bath or whatever. They have a pool and it's great. But you don't know that most of that is stemming from an income where 70% of that income is going to their housing expense, where most financial experts want you to be up in the 30% range for housing expenses. So I bring this up specifically for the reason that you might be amongst folks that you don't even know have a positive or even a higher positive net worth who are teachers who could be a customer service representative for Verizon, who could be XYZ, it doesn't matter. Um, if you're using the income responsibly to set aside money to purchase assets, because remember, wealth and net worth are correlated to both income and asset building. If you're just using your income to buy a bunch of stuff like cars, houses, trinkets, whatever it is, you're not building your net worth. So you have to remember, income alone is not enough to determine economic security. That income, furthermore, could be disrupted by an illness, a job loss. God forbid someone who has a $7,000 mortgage to sustain that kind of lifestyle ends up having the inability to work for 3 months because they're hospitalized, for example. Um, the other reason is that you can't tell how much income um, like, how do I want to say that? It could appear that someone has a high income, but they sure as heck might have a whole bunch of debt, more debt than you. So they could have a fancy job and a fancy job title, but you could be worth more than them because they have more debt than you. Um, so I bring this up all to say that net worth is a better indicator of your financial health. It's a better indicator of that scorecard because it might look like someone has it all, but they might be drowning in debt to sustain that lifestyle that they're outwardly projecting to everyone. Okay. So I think net worth is a really good tool to use. So there's three steps in calculating this. So step one, list financial and physical assets and their values, then add those values up to get your total assets. Productive assets are intangible, and we don't include them when calculating net worth. Step two, list liabilities and the amounts owed on them. Then add up these amounts, and then you'll get your total liabilities. And then step three, calculate total assets minus total liabilities to find your net worth. And let's use the calculation in these steps in the on page 12 of the participant guide. We have a try it in calculating net worth. So in this scenario, we've got Justine. She's calculating her net worth. So Justine bought her home 7 years ago. The current value of the house is 130,000, but she still owes 100,000 on her mortgage. She has 1,500 in a checking account. She has 500 in a savings account, which she uses for emergencies. She has a truck that she bought a few years back. She could sell it for 2,000. She still owes 3,000 on the loan for the truck. She has one credit card with a balance of 1,000 and has a student loan balance of 15,000. She has a lot of furniture and heirlooms handed down from her grandmother, including some genuine antiques. Their value was recently estimated at 7,000. So how would we calculate Justine's net worth? So let's take a look. And here's our table for calculation. So Justine's net worth would be 22,000. Um, how did we get there? So remember, Justine has a checking and savings account balance of 2,000. Her car's value is 2,000. She owns her home with a market value of 130,000. Remember, she has those personal possessions that were recently valued at 7,000. So of her total assets, we have a total of 141,000 from those items. So those are her assets. But remember, step two, we need to come up with her liabilities too. So remember, Justine has a credit card balance of 1,000. She still owes 100,000 on her mortgage. She still owes money on her car loan of 3,000. And then remember, the principal balance of her student loans is 15,000. So when we add that up, her total liabilities, the total amount that she still owes is 119,000. So we take her total assets of 141,000. We take her total liabilities of 119, we subtract them, and then we get a total net worth of 22,000. So that 22,000 is Justine's net worth. Now, let's briefly discuss how we increase or how we change our net worth. So you can increase your net worth by increasing your assets or decreasing your liabilities or a combination of both. As we talked about in the participant guide, um, you can kind of get an idea of what we would want to increase and what we would want to decrease. So specifically, let's talk about ways to increase the net worth, right? Spend less than you make. Totally sounds simple, but super tough. As we kind of already scratched the surface of, there's a lot of pressures to spend more money than we have. or uh, projecting whatever lifestyle we want people to think we're living or whatever. But I mean, really, it's an old timey thing, but we got to say it. I mean, try try living within our means is the old way, right? Um, Spend less than you make so that you have more money in savings. Easier said than done. Totally, I totally understand that. Another thing, buy less than you can afford, buying houses, cars, furniture, computers, phones, whatever it is. Maybe we don't get the I wish I could think of a good example. Maybe we don't want to buy the Samsung S26 Ultra Fold phone for $2,700, but we wait for the sale of the Samsung S26 for 400. I don't know. But you kind of see what I'm saying, right? Um, we know that we shouldn't buy a brand new Toyota Camry for $37,000 and finance it for 84 months at 11% interest. And maybe it would be more economical and responsible for us to buy that used Toyota Corolla that's got 75,000 miles on it, but it may be good for another 100,000 miles. The cars may be 17,000 and we can finance it. So, I mean, the idea is that buy less of whatever it is that you're trying to purchase because you don't want to overstretch yourself. Um, yeah, save money. Building savings is building an asset. Setting aside money for an emergency fund is building an asset. Participate in retirement savings program. If your job, if your work offers a 401k match, sometimes this refers to like the company will contribute up to a certain percentage and match your funds that you put in. That's free money. Um, I would only recommend the strategy though to participate in the savings in the retirement program if you set aside money for an emergency fund, if you have a savings account. Don't do one over the other first. There's that financial order of operations that I kind of already talked about. You wouldn't want to start a retirement account if you didn't have a savings account. Do the savings account first, then the emergency fund, and then the 401k, for example. Use debt responsibly. If you have an emergency fund set aside and you need a new washing machine, you may not have to use that credit card. Every time you swipe, you're creating a liability, which decreases your net worth. Pay down your debts if you're able to. It's a topic for another financial literacy workshop that we do, managing debt and in your expenses. But but it could be something that could be helpful. Kind of already talked about it, shopping around. Don't buy the first thing that you see. Wait for Amazon Prime Day. I don't know. That's kind of what we did. I know that we needed to buy, shoot, I already forget what we bought and it was already delivered. I don't remember what it was, but I was like, wait, Prime Day's in a month and we're going to save $50. So we waited. I don't, what the heck was it? I don't know. And then building more assets. Economic security comes from asset building because assets contribute to a positive net worth. Um, so even the possibility of creating more income by getting a higher paying job or a second job or monetizing a hobby or whatever, income allows you to purchase assets. So they both work in hand, as we kind of already talked about. After today's workshop, check out page 19 of the participant guide, Increasing My Net Worth, which is your net worth. Um, this is specific to you and your plan, right? So it's going to be different for both of us. How can I increase my net worth? Think about increasing assets, decreasing liabilities, or both. And then how would these changes affect my financial future? Yeah, so feel free to fill that out, check that out. That actually brings us to the end of section 2, and it's going to be the close of our workshop tonight. The last 2 sections are very specific and niche. Section 3 talks about your car as an asset. Section 4 talks about your education as an asset, kind of very specific. Feel free to check that out on your own. Um, but key takeaway from Section 2, net worth is a good measure of your financial stability. How much money you make, your income is not a good indicator. Because as we've already said, you can make $200,000 a year and spend $350,000 a year. That means you have a negative net worth. Calculate your net worth by subtracting your liabilities, money you owe others from your assets. Um, I'd be happy to answer any questions if any came up. Let me see if I can now turn my camera on. I was having a bad internet connection, so sorry as we presented, I was not there, but happy to help if there's any questions that you might have.
I don't see any questions. Thank you, Jessica. Go ahead. Let me unmute you. Oh, go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. This is such a great workshop. My question is it better to pay off student debt um completely than, I don't know, just waiting to pay it off and just pay the minimum payments?
That's a great question. It's going to be different for all of us, right? Because the amount is going to be different.
Mhm.
The interest rate could be different. It depends if it's a private student loan or if it's a federal student loan. It depends if the loan's in deferment or if you're making payments. So there's a lot of factors involved. But I think that there is an answer, um, kind of generalized, which would be to consider the the steps that we want to take first. Um, I would say that it depends on your financial goals. I personally wouldn't pay that type of debt off if I owed other type of debt. More scary debt for me would be like if you had a credit card balance that you owed because the interest rate would be higher.
Mhm.
Um, if you were behind on other liabilities that you might have, maybe rent, mortgage, utility bills. So I would kind of prioritize it as a less risky, less scary thing. Um, and I also, before I would want to pay that off, I would want to have a savings account established with any sum of money in it. Just having it with the ability to put extra money into it is important. And then after that, I would do an emergency fund. So um, I would probably start putting more emphasis on paying down that debt once I've established and achieved other things prior to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, and the other thing I would say is that student loans, especially federal student loans, are you can kind of almost think about them in the classification of a mortgage,
Mhm.
meaning that you have generally, I think for federal loans, something like the ability of paying these off within 20 years. So they kind of spread it out over a long period of time. The interest rates, especially for federal loans, are lower than other liabilities like credit card interest rates or interest rates that you would take out for a car loan. So I hope that's helpful. It's an answer, but not an answer. Um, yeah, it's kind of dependent on some factors. Good question though.
That's helpful. And I have one more question. So I
Please.
realized that credit score kind of changes, right? Like from 1 month to a month, and I think that has to do with what you're talking about, like liabilities kind of changing on and the assets. So if I were to be considering like in a near future, like maybe potentially like purchasing a condo or something like
Yeah.
that, because the credit score kind of fluctuates, I mean, do they look at like the credit score based on like the last the most current, or are they looking at within the average of 6 months or a year? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it would be your credit score is pretty much like it's your, you know how we characterize net worth as being the indicator of your personal financial health?
Mm-hmm.
The credit score is your personal credit health,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that at the time of you trying to get pre-approved for a mortgage, they're going to use that current credit score that they're pulling um, from the credit reporting agencies. So it would be at that period of time of whatever money you're taking out, whether it be to buy a car, to buy a house, to buy a condo, so on and so forth. Um, Now, the number will change based on a whole heck of a lot of factors. We kind of talk about that in more nuance in using credit cards, which is another topic. But here's what I will say. The nice thing is that back in the day, you were only able to pull your credit report once a year at annualcreditreport.com. My understanding is that you can pull it whenever you want. Um, I don't think it's necessary because I don't think the number changes as much as you think. Uh, there's a weight model based on FICO that the credit bureaus use to determine what the score is. Debt to income ratio is one. Credit utilization is probably the highest one. So it depends. But you have the ability now to monitor it more closely and more frequently than you've ever had. Um, but I don't think that it would be necessary for you to pull it as often as maybe you would want. Um, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that was helpful. And then I have one more question still like touching on that
Please.
subject. So if you have like if I have the funds to be able to potentially buy like a condo, would it be not, I mean, what would be best to use, put all your money into the condo, or is it always safer and better to have a savings account?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like this is where I wish I had it available so I could share on my screen the
Mhm.
financial order of operations. Um, Again, like when we kind of discussed whether it would be beneficial to pay off the student loan, there's
Mhm.
factors involved. There's other things that need to be established first. I would never recommend prioritizing purchasing a house over, do you have a savings account?
Mhm.
Do you have an emergency fund? Do you have a retirement account established? Those would be the first three things I would concentrate on before I would even save or consider saving for a down payment on a house.
Mhm.
So, uh, the other thing I would plug into savings account, emergency fund, retirement account. In between savings account, emergency fund, and retirement account, I would plug in those high debt liabilities that you have, not the student loan, but do you have credit card debt that needs to be taken care of first? That way, when you're actually you put yourself in a better position that you have the ability to save for the down payment required. That way, when you take on a mortgage, you don't have these other factors weighing and pulling against you.
Mhm.
You have more peace of mind where you're only having to deal with that one thing instead of having to deal with seven things simultaneously. I wouldn't take out a mortgage on a home if I was still trying to put money in an emergency fund. I wouldn't open up a mortgage if I owed $5,000 in a credit card.
Mhm.
So it's kind of steps that are necessary to take prior to taking out money for a mortgage. Um, I would even argue that that would be the case if the mortgage payment is the same amount of money that you're paying for rent currently. It's, I think it would provide more peace of mind to take those steps first than to deal with everything happening simultaneously. I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? You don't want to have a bunch of different payments plus the mortgage, right? That or debt.
And I didn't answer your question specifically, I'm sorry, because you did mention like how much money would you want to put towards the mortgage. So I think that this number is outdated now because h- homes are just so overvalued right now. I honestly don't know how people are purchasing. It's just beyond me. It's always been financial experts' advice that you don't want to spend more than 30% towards living expenses. That's still pretty accurate. I would probably say between 30 and 40 now. You wouldn't want to go over 40. Um, if you can, I would be within that range for, and it's everything. It's mortgage, whether or not you have to pay a PMI on it, private mortgage insurance, depending on how much your down payment is, what your homeowner's insurance is, and then finally, if there's like an HOA or condo association fee that would be attached to the purchase. You don't want that to be over between 30 and 40% of how much you bring in every month.
That was good information, and I do see how that's very challenging in Los Angeles.
Very challenging. Yep. But great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Jessica and everybody for being here. And thanks, Tom, for all the valuable information. We'll go ahead and close it out and I'll hear from you soon.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
All
Have a
right.
good night.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night. Bye.
Bye.